Welcome to the Vital Spirit podcast. I'm Dr. Kelly Livingston, a naturopathic physician and your guide to a new health reality, one that connects body, mind, and spirit. Together, we'll dive deep into the art and science of holistic healing. Through working with hundreds of women through midlife transitions, I've discovered something profound. Most of our physical and emotional challenges are rooted in a maladaptive stress response. And true healing begins when we regulate our nervous system. Each episode will explore complex health topics in simple, empowering ways, uncover the deeper wisdom within each of us, and share practical tools for nervous system regulation to help you awaken your vital force and create lasting wellness. So, if you're ready to reconnect with yourself, your health, and your purpose, let's begin this journey together so you can experience life more fully human and deeply healed. I've wanted to record this episode for a long time, and I think part of why I've waited is because I knew that if I was going to do it well, I couldn't just sit down and record and do it quickly. Homeopathy is one of those topics that gets flattened almost immediately the moment we start trying to explain it. It gets reduced to phrases that are technically recognizable, but not actually meaningful enough to change how you understand the body, how you listen to a patient or yourself if you are the patient, or how you practice medicine. So I do think this is helpful if you're a practitioner, and it's definitely helpful if you are someone following along on your health awakening journey. When we talk about homeopathy, we use phrases such as like cures like, or it's diluted, or there's nothing actually in it, or it stimulates the body. And while all of those phrases touch some small piece of the larger conversation, none of them really tell you what homeopathy is in a way that does justice to how precise, how nuanced, and how individualized this medicine actually is. Hi, and welcome back to the Vital Spirit podcast. I'm Dr. Kelly Livingston, naturopathic physician and homeopathy expert. Here we explore what it really means to heal across body, mind, and spirit. And as you've probably realized if you've been following along, I talk about homeopathy a lot. Homeopathy is one of the modalities that we use as naturopathic physicians. We actually have 4 years of homeopathy as part of our medical education, and then we have 2 more years of clinic where we learn how to use homeopathy with patients. So you've probably heard me reference homeopathy in some of the cases I've shared with you. I've been naming remedies or speaking about patterns. I've used words like keynotes or repertorize. And I know that for many of you listening, there hasn't yet been a true foundation laid for what I actually mean when I'm saying those words. So today is that episode. But we're not just talking about homeopathy in general. I will have an acute homeopathic remedy episode and a first aid episode. I love to travel with homeopathy and my first aid homeopathy kit. So I'm sure that you guys would be interested in that. But today we're talking about homeopathy specifically in perimenopause and menopause. Because in my clinical experience, this is one of the most revealing and one of the most important and probably most underappreciated times to be working this way with a patient. So settle in for this episode. So maybe you've heard me say things like, this looks like a sepia picture, or this one sounds more like lachesis, or this feels like we need to understand the constitutional pattern more deeply before we're chasing a symptom with a remedy. And if you don't have any background in homeopathy, that can sound really abstract, like, Dr. Kelly, what are you talking about? So I knew there would come a point where I had to sit down and give this topic the space that it actually deserves. And I knew I wanted to do that first through the lens of perimenopause and menopause, because in my clinical experience, this is a really wonderful time to use homeopathic remedies. So we're not even going to start right away with the remedies or even a modern definition, but we're going to start with a line from Hahnemann's Organon, which is one of the books that we use to learn homeopathy in medical school. And I come back to this again and again because it's a simple and foundational statement. In Aphorism 1 of the Organon, Hahnemann writes that the physician's highest calling, his only calling, is to make sick people healthy, to heal, as it is termed. And that sounds almost too simple, right? It sounds obvious when you say it. And if you keep reading, you'll begin to feel that what he's doing is he's drawing a line between two very different ways of practicing medicine. One way stays close to the patient, it stays close to observation, and it stays close to what's actually happening in the organism. The other way begins to move away from the person and into theory, explanation, abstraction, classification, and intellectual distance from the organism. And that tension is not something that belonged only to his time. We still live inside of that tension now in healthcare. Because modern medicine is astonishing in many ways. We have extraordinary diagnostic tools, we have imaging, we have lab markers. I love to talk about labs. We have ways of naming and classifying pathology that can be life saving, clarifying, and necessary. But at the same time, there's a way in which the individual person can really disappear inside of that. And the body becomes a set of tissues, pathways, and markers rather than a living, coordinated organism expressing something meaningful. And this is one of the reasons I think homeopathy matters so much today, because it forces the clinician back into the discipline of observation of the patient. It forces us to ask what the organism is doing, not just what diagnosis the organism carries, right? So in naturopathic medicine, where we're following the therapeutic order and the principles of naturopathic medicine I've educated you on, the first principle is do no harm, right? And striving to use the least invasive, most natural tools when we can, while we support the body's innate intelligence and ability to heal, while we support the vis and we remove obstacles to cure. Homeopathy falls exactly under these principles as a tool. And the first step is observing the patient and patterns. And I've really been coming back to homeopathy a lot recently with patients because I've been noticing trends where, probably because of social media, patients are chasing diagnoses more than I've ever seen before. So maybe they saw on someone's account that they healed from PCOS or mast cell activation syndrome or anxiety, or maybe they've seen this HRT is going to give you superpowers. And it's still just such a reductionistic, mechanistic way of thinking when we want to label and diagnose and find one pill to cure every ill or one pill to cure, insert whatever diagnosis you've figured out that you have, right? So it's as if we can just figure out the diagnosis and things will work out because there will be a cure that we can be handed. So we chase these diagnoses, we chase these labels. And this is just so limited and truly what holds many, many patients back from healing. It's never been about the label that we give to a collection of symptoms. Healing has never been and will never be about a pill for every ill. Healing is to be made whole. And in order to heal, we need to treat the whole person. If I were to say as directly as possible what homeopathy is, I would say that it is a system of medicine based on the observation that disease is not primarily a structural event. It does not begin at the level of tissue change. It begins as a disturbance in the regulation and organization of the living system. And what we call symptoms are the way that disturbance becomes perceptible. Hahnemann used the term vital force for that organizing intelligence of the organism. I know that word can be a distraction for some people, so I did a whole deep dive on the vital force, vis medicatrix naturae, a couple episodes ago, because when you were working with the vis, homeopathy is one of the best tools to do that. Sometimes it's heard as mystical, vague, or archaic. Some people are turned off by the fact that it can be labeled as energy medicine because it's functioning at a frequency or energy level. But when I hear it in the context of the Organon and the context of actual clinical work with patients, I don't hear mystical claims so much as a description of something we observe all the time, that the body behaves as an organized whole. It's coordinated. The body adapts, it responds, it regulates, it changes multiple systems at once in relation to stressors, infections, injuries, emotions, and the environment. It's not simply a set of disconnected parts. And Hahnemann makes a very important point, which is that the organizing principle cannot be observed directly. You don't look under a microscope and see the vital force. You don't draw blood and isolate it in a vial. You know it by its effects. You know it by what the organism does. You know it by sensation, function, response, behavior, mood, reactivity, heat, sleep, elimination, appetite, pain, inflammation, all of it. You know it by what that patient expresses when they're telling you about their symptoms, and you know it by what you see in labs, which means that symptoms in homeopathy are not noise. They're not incidental. They're not unfortunate side effects of disease. The only way that the deeper disorder becomes clear to us, they are actually communications from the vis, and they're the only way that we can track where we need to go next when we're healing. And this one shift changes everything, because once you understand symptoms as the expression of disturbance rather than the disturbance itself, you stop asking only how to get rid of them, and you start asking what pattern they belong to. We've been talking a lot about patterns in the last few weeks. You start asking, what is the system doing? How is it organizing itself under stress? What is the shape of the response? What's the quality of the response? And that's exactly where homeopathy begins. When I hear a patient tell me that they've been on X, Y, and Z medication for however many years to suppress a symptom or to deal with a diagnosis, I often think of it as we're trying to essentially shut the body up. And that can sound really aggressive, but the longer that I practice medicine the way I practice medicine, that to me seems very abrasive, to just shut the body up, turn the symptoms off, not even ask what they're trying to tell us. It's so sad to me when that's the only form of medicine that a woman's known when they first walk into my office. So I think it's worth slowing down a little bit here, because I do think that homeopathy can just sound so abstract at first. And I want to bring it back to ordinary physiology that you can understand. So if you watch the body in acute illness, it becomes easier to grasp what I mean. So most people, when they think of homeopathy, they've probably heard of arnica, right? You've probably heard, oh, take arnica for a bruise. Or if you think about fevers, when a fever rises, that's not random heat. Just like a bruise is not random. It's your body responding to an injury, to getting a bump or pushing pressure into the skin and creating disruption of the blood vessels. A bruise is created. When you have that fever rising and your body is coordinating itself to respond to some infection, or it's making mucus to move things through the body, that's not just inconvenient. That's not just an annoyance that we want to shut up. It's movement, it's trapping, it's clearing, it's transport. Maybe pain emerges. That's not an error. It's actually to change your behavior and redirect energy, maybe limit your movement, maybe get you to rest, right? When your sleep is disturbed or you're experiencing anxiety, we've talked about this before. This is the body doing something. It's responding. It is attempting to restore balance to survive a challenge. The body is designed to respond and to bring itself back to balance and homeostasis. Now, that response might not be sufficient. It could even become excessive. It might become chronic, especially if we suppress it and we don't allow it to finish what it was trying to do. But it is never random. And once you truly see that, it becomes so much harder to treat symptoms as if they're meaningless mechanical glitches in the system. And this is why suppression is something that we talk about a lot as a concept in homeopathy. And I want to be careful here, because I don't mean that every suppressive intervention is wrong or should never be used. That would be simplistic and irresponsible. There are times when suppression is necessary, stabilizing, compassionate, or even life-saving. But what homeopathy teaches you to observe is that when you repeatedly interrupt processes without understanding them, the pattern of illness can change over time. So something that was acute can become chronic, and something that was external can become more internal. Something that was clear can become more diffuse. Symptoms don't simply vanish. Energy is not created or destroyed. Symptoms can move, they can reorganize, they can deepen, they can involve other systems. And once you've watched enough patients over long enough stretches of time, as I've had the honor of doing, this stops being theory and it starts becoming really clinically obvious. So when I was first learning homeopathy, I might have had to learn how to repertorize and pick up my materia medica and figure out what picture that patient really matched up with and then ask them more questions. And now I might just very clearly pick up on a pattern because I'm so familiar with the remedies and the keynotes and the repertories. But in the beginning, you have to start to learn how to look at symptoms and patterns and pictures. So that brings us to the law of similars, which is probably one of the most quoted concepts in homeopathy. And it's definitely very misunderstood. So the law of similars, or like cures like, sounds simple, but unless you define what like means, it becomes almost useless. Like does not mean the same diagnosis. It does not mean the same pathology. It does not mean that if you have hot flashes, you take the hot flash remedy. It means the same pattern of response. So, a substance, when given to a healthy individual and approving, produces a characteristic pattern, not just a symptom, but a totality, a certain kind of headache with a certain timing, certain modalities, certain emotional tone, certain sensory qualities, maybe certain dreams or cravings or thermal states. These provings are not random, they're forming recognizable pictures. So, when a patient presents with a pattern that resembles the proving picture of a remedy, that remedy can stimulate a response in the organism. It's going to stimulate the vis. And I think that's a really good place to pause for today because what we've done in this first part is lay the foundation. We've talked about what homeopathy actually is, how to understand symptoms differently, and how to begin seeing the body as a pattern instead of a collection of problems. And in part two, we're going to take this into practice. We're going to talk about potency, how remedies actually work in the body, and how I think through real cases in perimenopause, because this is where everything that we just talked about becomes real. So if this is already shifting something in how you see your body, I want you to stay with me for part two and make sure that you send this to someone who's been curious about homeopathy. As always, thank you for being here. And if you can take the time to download, subscribe, and even review, it will help us reach more women. Have a great day. See you next week.